June 6, 2025, Geneva, Switzerland. Rain tapped against the glass roof of the World Forum Hall like impatient fingers. Inside, rows of world leaders, scientists, and journalists sat tense. The Global Health Ethics Forum had never felt this heavy. They came to talk about vaccine equity, but everyone knew something else was bubbling beneath the surface. Then came President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, young, calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet rage. On the giant digital backdrop, the moderator welcomed Dr. Anthony Fauci, now retired, but still an influential voice. The crowd clapped out of habit. Traoré didn't clap. Within minutes, the debate took a dark turn. Fauci said, "Science saved the world. Vaccines were a global success." Traoré leaned forward and whispered into his mic, but his voice cut through the hall like thunder. "Science for whom? Your science silenced our pain." A chill fell. The moderator smiled nervously. "Let's stay respectful." Traoré's face didn't move. "Respect?" he asked. "Where was respect when my people were test subjects without consent?" Someone gasped. The camera panned across the hall. Eyes widened. Pens froze. The crowd didn't know whether to clap or run. This was not on the agenda. The debate had only just begun, but Geneva already felt like it was on fire. Dr. Fauci cleared his throat. "President Traoré, with all due respect, Africa received billions in medical aid." Traoré interrupted. "Aid laced with strings. Needles sent without translation. Vaccines tested on women who never saw the form they signed." Silence. He pulled a folded letter from his jacket. This was written by a Burkina Faso mother. She buried her 2 sons in 2021 after a trial vaccine went wrong. She begged for help. No reply. Her pain was never data enough. He handed the letter to the moderator, whose hands trembled as she held it. The camera zoomed in on the words. "They called it protection, but my boys came back weaker. My babies died speaking French I never taught them. Words they learned in pain." Some in the crowd began to cry. Fauci looked shaken. That's anecdotal." Traoré raised his voice for the first time. "Don't you dare call a mother's grief anecdotal." A young African doctor in the audience stood up. Then another. Then 10 more. Geneva was no longer a forum. It was a reckoning. Backstage, aides scrambled. Livestream comments exploded. Hound Traoré's Fauci. Africa speaks. Health justice now. But inside, it was dead quiet. Traoré reached under the table. Cameras clicked. He pulled out a red file marked confidential. "I didn't come here empty-handed," he said. "This is from a whistleblower inside one of your health partners. You knew about failed trials in Mali, Chad, and Niger. Yet the world heard nothing." Fauci stammered. "We follow protocols. Every trial." "Then why were side effects edited out of final reports?" Traoré shot back. The moderator moved to end the session, but the audience shouted her down. "Let him speak." Then Traoré said something that shook every corner of the hall. "Africa is not your clinical sandbox. Our pain is not your progress." A young journalist live streaming from row 4 whispered through tears, "This isn't just a debate, it's history." Fauci turned pale. Traoré wasn't done. He turned to the global cameras and said, "To every African mother who buried her child quietly, this is your moment. You are seen. You are heard. You are not alone." People cried. Some hugged. Others dropped their pens and just stared. The world was no longer watching a debate. It was watching truth bleed through walls built of silence. The auditorium smelled of sweat and anxiety. Phones lit up everywhere. People weren't just filming. They were crying. A woman from Senegal stood and screamed, "We told you. For years we told you." She wasn't part of the panel. Security hesitated, but Traoré raised his hand gently. "Let her speak." he said. The woman's voice trembled. My daughter was part of a malaria vaccine trial. She died 2 days after the injection. They said it was unrelated. They buried her report. But I know what I saw. The room fell apart. Even delegates from Western nations looked uncomfortable. Fauci leaned back, eyes glassy. Traoré didn't gloat. His voice softened. This is not vengeance. This is memory. He paused. We were told to be grateful for medicine. But medicine should heal, not haunt. Instead, we became ghosts in your labs. A man in a white coat from the CDC put his head in his hands. Tears leaked between his fingers. The silence now had a pulse, the kind that screams louder than words. The moderator whispered, "We need a break." But no one moved. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was a funeral for denial. Hours passed. The live stream kept rolling. News stations across the world ditched their programming. CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC, and France 24 all cut in. One headline: Africa speaks, and the world listens. Traoré stood calmly at the center, like a lighthouse in a storm. The moderator tried again to regain order. Mr. President, do you believe all global health aid is corrupt? No, Traoré said firmly. I believe much of it is built on good intention. But good intentions built slavery. Good intentions fueled colonization. And good intentions let little African boys die while papers were still being peer-reviewed. Someone in the back sobbed. Then Traoré pointed to the audience. How many of you here today have ever spoken directly to a family whose child died during a vaccine trial? Not a single hand went up. Then he asked, how many of you signed off funding those trials? 7 hands rose. The silence exploded again, not loud, but deep, like shame had a sound. He continued, that's the gap, the one between your policies and our graves. A European health minister whispered, we didn't know. Traoré looked at him. You didn't want to. Traoré paused to sip water. His hands were shaking now, but his voice never wavered. He reached into his bag and pulled out a pair of tiny, dusty sandals, worn-out children's shoes. The room gasped. These belong to a boy named Isaka, Traoré said. 5 years old, bright, loved stars. His father begged doctors to stop the trial injections. They didn't listen. He held up the sandals. When Isaka died, his father left these on the hospital steps. No lawsuit, no press, just grief. A sob broke from the front row. Fauci's eyes turned red. I didn't know about Isaka. Traoré stared at him. But you knew children died. You just thought some deaths were worth the price. He placed the sandals on the debate table between himself and Fauci, like a border neither of them could cross. These are not props. These are proofs. Then he said the words that shattered the room. Every dollar you made from rushed vaccines came wrapped in a child's scream. A UN ambassador fainted. A global reckoning was no longer coming. It had arrived. A new voice rose from the crowd, soft but steady. An older woman in a faded blue scarf stood slowly. Her hands trembled, yet her spine stayed straight. I waited, she said. Everyone turned. I waited outside a trial clinic in Ouagadougou for 3 days. My daughter was inside. They said it was routine testing. She came out with fever, vomiting, and silence. 2 days later, she died in my arms. Traoré closed his eyes. She was 12, the woman said. A visible shudder passed through the audience. Some looked away, others cried freely. The woman held up a small photograph of her daughter. It was folded, worn, kissed 1,000 times. No one ever called me, no apology, just silence. Fauci sat frozen. His fingers tapped the table nervously. But he didn't speak. Traoré walked down from the stage and hugged the woman. She sobbed into his shoulder like he was her son. "This is why I came here," Traoré whispered into her ear, loud enough for the mic to catch. "Not for revenge, but so you'd never feel alone again." The crowd stood. This wasn't a debate anymore. It had become a cathedral of grief. That moment, the hug, the old mother crying, was caught by a dozen smartphones. One clip went viral within minutes. Caption: "A president with a heart bigger than a policy." Hashtags: Traoré's Fauci, health justice. Now, Africa speaks. In under 12 hours, it had 24 million views. On TikTok, teenagers posted reaction videos, some wiping tears, others speechless. On YouTube, analysts paused their political commentary to say, "We've never seen this level of honesty from a world leader." Traoré's face, steady and wet with emotion, became a symbol, not of politics, but of pain that refused to stay silent. Governments scrambled to respond. Press releases were issued, but nothing could match the raw truth in that room. The clip reached even the President of the United States, who was watching from the White House. He called his chief of staff and said, "Get me everything on this Traoré guy, now." Meanwhile, in Geneva, Traoré returned to his seat and whispered, "Maybe this is how healing starts, not with answers, but with tears." Someone behind him whispered, "He just changed everything." And he did. As the forum resumed, the moderator's face was pale. Her voice quivered. "President Traoré, what do you want the world to do?" He looked at the audience and beyond them, to the cameras broadcasting to millions. "I want answers, apologies, and above all, accountability." He raised a hand slowly as if holding something sacred. "I want every African child's death investigated, not dismissed." Gasps. "I want medical companies to publish full reports, not edited press releases." Tears. "And I want African scientists at the table, not just African bodies on the tables." The room broke into slow applause, hesitant, unsure, then overwhelming. Traoré's voice shook as he added, "We're not asking to be saved. We're asking to be seen. You called us recipients, but we were always equals." A young medical student from Nigeria stood up and shouted through tears, "You speak for all of us." The hall erupted. Even some Western delegates stood. Fauci lowered his head, crushed under the weight of truths he could no longer outrun. And just like that, Africa was no longer silent. It had found its voice, and it was shaking the world. As the forum wound into its second day, a new voice entered the conversation. A young woman named Amira, a Kenyan journalist, approached the mic. "I have something," she said, her voice thin but unwavering. "It's a letter, dated 2016, sent by African health workers to the WHO after children in Ghana developed severe side effects during a vaccine rollout." She held up the envelope. It was marked "Received," but no reply ever came. She walked forward and placed it on the table between Traoré and Fauci. "You never opened it," she said, "so I brought it here." Fauci looked broken. He didn't touch it. The moderator whispered, "Dr. Fauci, would you like to respond?" He hesitated, then leaned into the mic. "I don't know how to fix this." Traoré didn't gloat. He nodded slowly. "Then listen to us. That's how you start." He turned to Amira. "You are brave." She wiped her eyes. "No, I'm just tired of being unheard." And that was the moment the conversation shifted, from accusation to awakening. Behind the stage, organizers gathered handwritten names from the audience. Names of children lost to trials, negligence, or abandonment in the name of global health. By afternoon, the list had filled 3 scrolls. Traoré took them gently and carried them back to the podium. "These," he said, unrolling them slowly, "are the children whose names never made headlines." He began reading them, one by one. A whisper, a prayer, Afiwa, Kojo, Mubarak, Fati, Musa, Chinyere. Each name fell like a drumbeat. By the 10th name, the audience was in tears. By the 50th, even the security guards had bowed their heads. By the 100th, Fauci stood. He walked to the front, voice cracking. I was part of a system. I believed in its science, but I never met its victims. Until now. He placed his hand over the list. I am sorry. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Traoré nodded, tears in his eyes. We don't want your pity. We want your partnership, but it must begin with truth. For the first time, both men cried, not as enemies, but as humans. The whole world watched and wept. By the 3rd day of the forum, a transformation had occurred. The stage that once separated leaders from the people had been taken down. Chairs were moved, circles formed. It looked less like a summit and more like a village meeting. President Traoré knelt on the floor with parents, nurses, and grieving families. The cameras still rolled, but no one cared anymore. This wasn't about headlines now. It was about healing. Then, in a moment no one expected, Dr. Fauci knelt too. Not for press, not for show, but for atonement. He faced a grieving father from Mali. The man held up a photo of his son, eyes full of fire and sorrow. Fauci whispered, I'm sorry we didn't see him. I'm sorry we didn't see you. The father stared back, then did the unimaginable. He reached out and embraced him. The hall trembled with emotion. Delegates cried openly. The live stream comments flooded with, I'm bawling. This is history. Africa, you are teaching the world how to be human again. And from Geneva, a new global truth was born. When power kneels, healing begins. Just when the forum felt like it had reached its deepest point, a whisper of pain came from the back of the room. A frail boy, maybe 10, maybe younger, stood shakily with his mother beside him. He wore a faded red shirt, torn at the shoulder. The boy looked at Traoré, not with fear, but with the quiet knowing of someone who had already seen too much. The moderator offered him the mic, but he shook his head. Instead, he walked forward and held out a small plastic bag. Inside it, a broken thermometer, an old clinic card, and a faded Polaroid. His mother spoke. This is all I have left from his twin brother. They were used in a vaccine trial in 2020. One survived, one didn't. The room was silent. Traoré bent down, knelt before the boy, and asked his name. Khalid, he whispered. Traoré took his hand and pressed it against his chest. Your brother's name will live here forever. And in that moment, no one saw a president. They saw a father of nations cradling one boy's grief as if it were his own. He didn't speak after that. He didn't have to. That night, Geneva experienced a strange blackout. The power in the conference hall flickered, then vanished. Screens blank, mics cut, cameras dead. But no one left. Candles were lit. Flashlights came out. Someone began to sing, an old African lullaby. Soft, aching, holy. Traoré picked up the melody, his voice raw with feeling. Mothers joined. Then grandmothers. Even delegates from the West. In the glow of candlelight, truths were spoken without microphones, and hearts were heard without translation. An elderly Rwandan doctor stood and said, We used to think science was the only language the world respected. But maybe grief is louder. Outside, thousands had gathered, holding phones and candles, watching the live stream with tears running down their cheeks. The blackout became a symbol, not of failure, but of awakening. Because in that darkness, humanity lit itself. And Traoré whispered to Khalid, still sitting beside him, This is what change looks like. It's not loud, it's not perfect, but it's happening. The lights returned, but the silence lingered. It wasn't empty. It was sacred. As the forum neared its end, Traoré walked alone to the stage. He didn't carry a speech. He carried a small wooden box. "I'm not here for applause," he said softly. "I'm here for memory." He opened the box. Inside were tiny belongings sent in by grieving families from across Africa. A baby's sock, a school badge, a bracelet made of beads. "These," Traoré said, his voice trembling, "are the things we never archived, because our grief wasn't on record." He paused. "So I brought them here, to leave them on your table." He placed the box on the center of the forum stage. No more numbers, no more statistics. These were children. They laughed, they danced, they dreamed. And with that, he stepped back. No applause, just tears. Every eye was red. Even Fauci stood again, not to argue, but to nod. "You changed something in me, President Traoré, and I hope I'm not too late." Traoré nodded gently. It's never too late to be human. And that was the moment humanity became policy, not by force, but by feeling. On the final morning, world leaders gathered one last time. The room felt different, not just quieter, but heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then, something unexpected happened. Dr. Anthony Fauci returned to the stage. But this time, he carried no notes. He looked older, not from age, but from the weight of things finally felt. He turned to Traoré, then to the crowd, then to the cameras streaming live to the world. "I was blind. We all were. We saw diseases, but not the people behind them." He removed his lapel pin, the one that marked him as a senior U.S. health advisor, and placed it on the box of belongings Traoré had left the night before. "I can't undo the past, but I can begin with a word we don't say enough." He looked into the lens. "I'm sorry." The room shook with emotion. Traoré walked forward and held his hand. "Let this be the first vaccine we all need. Truth." Outside, people cried. Inside, even leaders who once scoffed at Traoré wiped away tears. The world was watching, and for once, it listened. Geneva's closing ceremony was unlike any ever seen. There were no speeches. Instead, children from across Africa, including Khalid in his red shirt, were invited onto the stage. They sang in 10 different languages, their voices bright with hope and scars. Behind them, screens flashed real reforms already pledged. $3 billion toward African-led health labs. A global health equity council with African majority. Mandatory response to future whistleblower letters. Each item brought a fresh wave of emotional comments online. "I can't stop crying. This is what the world should look like." Khalid's face. "I'll never forget him." Traoré didn't stand with the leaders. He stood beside the mothers, and when the children finished singing, he turned to the world one last time. "We don't want sympathy. We want sovereignty. We don't want your cameras. We want your courage." He raised a scroll. "This is our new chapter, and this time, we're writing it ourselves." Then he did something no one expected. He handed the pen to Khalid, and the boy wrote one word: justice. As the forum ended, crowds outside held candles, not for mourning, but for memory. Traoré walked into the streets of Geneva without guards. People didn't cheer. They bowed their heads as he passed, not because he was powerful, but because he had carried their pain with dignity. Inside the hall, the wooden box of keepsakes was sealed in glass, a permanent monument to the forgotten. Above it, carved in gold, "Our pain was not a footnote, it was a chapter." The live stream closed with a final camera angle. Khalid and Traoré, sitting side by side under a tree outside the forum, sharing roasted groundnuts and quiet laughter. There were no more speeches, only a feeling that something had shifted, not just in policy, but in hearts. And now, It's your turn, viewer. Yes, you. If this story moved you, like this video, if you cried, even a little, comment the word justice below. Let the world see how many of us are awake. Subscribe if you believe stories like this should be told again and again, not to entertain, but to heal. And finally, share this with someone who needs hope, someone who's tired, someone who deserves to be heard. Because this candle, it's not ours anymore. It's yours. Hold it high and never let it go.